thing about RIM, it literally is a whole new paradigm of how to work on getting free of the emotional pain, the trauma, the blocks, the limiting beliefs that are locked in with the unexperienced, meaning we need to experience them, and unreleased emotions. And RIM is just a quicker, easier, more effective method to dissolve these unfinished, uncomfortable, painful, and traumatic feelings that all of us have. So I want you to think of them as like invisible speed bumps that you keep hitting them in your life. It's like traveling with the emergency brake on. As we want to release them. If you've ever driven your car and you have an emergency brake on, if you release the brake, you just go faster. So if you've ever felt triggered, if you felt stuck, if you don't know why you're not moving forward, if you've had chronic pain and health issues, or if you want to work with people who have these, if you're a coach, you're a trainer, you're a teacher, you're an educator, you're a family member who just wants to help people in your family, your children, your husband, your wife, anyone at all in the neighborhood, perhaps in your church or synagogue, whatever it is, these are tools you can apply to yourself and apply to other people. Let me just stop talking about how wonderful you are and see if you want to say anything else about yourself before I ask you some questions like, what is RIM? What does RIM stand for? How does it work? And why should we care?
Well, thank you, Jack. First of all, I just want to say how much fun it is to be here. As you said, we've been working together for 14 years, and I'm always learning things from you. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity of been able to work together over all these years. And I would say that in terms of what about me that I might add, that well, our mission at the RIM Institute is to eliminate unnecessary suffering. And you mentioned it. And I started my career like with over 20 years as a mental health professional and worked from intensive services all the way to teaching and then in private practice as a psychotherapist. And it was so much work and it was so hard at times. And I guess kept searching. I just kept searching because it's like there's got to be an easier way. There just has to be. It just made sense to me. And so after a sabbatical, I ended up like setting aside everything I thought I knew and everything I thought I didn't know, which isn't an easy thing to do. We psychotherapists, we're pretty invested in what we know. We've spent a lot of time and money on it. But by doing that, I just started to be with people, with clients. And in some ways, I didn't create RIM, I discovered it. Because what it is I started to discover what's possible within us that I didn't know about. Even though I had a master's in psychiatric nursing and a PhD in human communication, it was like I didn't know these things. So I would just throw that out. That it has been such a fun journey for me personally. Instead of me creating RIM, it feels like RIM's been creating me. Actually, it keeps stretching me to do what needs to be done. And it's kind of like having a child. You do whatever you need to do for your child to be successful and go out and live its purpose. And so that's my relationship with RIM, I would say.
And I notice the same thing's true with me, that I keep noticing, well, this works, that doesn't. Every time I go down that road, I find resistance. If I go this way, it breaks through. This is a lot easier. And I'm always looking for easier and faster. You may remember there was a time when I would have 300 people in rows in front of chairs with these foam bats beating the chairs, saying, I hate you, to their mother, and then crying and being held. And now we don't need to do all that. We've learned so many new technologies, including RIM, which allow us to accelerate the release of these emotions without all the traumatic acting out, perhaps the re-stimulation of those things that don't need to necessarily be reinforced in a way that is unnecessary. So talk to everybody about what does RIM stand for, and then let's talk a little bit about what the methodology is and how it's been effective and some of the miracles you've seen with people that you've worked with.
Right. So the scientific acronym for REM is regenerating images in memory. and it really reflects the neuroscience that is supporting it. Originally, the acronym that came, because I was just out there playing, and it came very magically, was releasing the inner magician. And after you have been practicing RIM for a while, you go, oh, wow, I really get the inner magician part, because it can feel very magical, because it's just so different than what we usually do.
Regenerating images in memory. And you
Yeah.
mentioned that there's neuroscience that backs that up. Can you speak for a minute about that?
Sure. Yeah, I would love to. So that at the year 2000, a graduate student discovered that we can actually destabilize or unlock emotional memory. So emotional memory is not permanent, and it's different than factual memory. There is a discernment between the two. So that emotional memory is very subjective. To open it, you have to be in the memory. That's the way it gets destabilized. So by being in the memory again, then we can redo it. But there's so many tools that use thought to try and consciously redo a memory. But if you're not in the memory, it doesn't work. It's just an intellectual overlay. Does that make sense, Jack?
Yeah, I think it does. So you said you want to follow it rather than lead it. So tell us how someone comes in, they present something to you, and then how do you follow that back to this original memory that needs to be regenerated, if you will?
Right. So what we're doing is we're collaborating with the organic emotional system. So we actually have them close their eyes, or some people, like, people who have been traumatized sometimes need to keep their eyes open, and that's fine too. It's just having the client begin to focus inward, begin to become aware. So you could say you're moving into a meditative state, but we're not introducing particular images into that state. We're allowing the person to start to become aware of their body. So it's very body centered. And that's really critical, because that's where emotional memory gets stored, is in the body and the nervous system and the brain, and also where it originates. So it originates in a nonverbal way. So that we're using body awareness, the senses, all of the senses, and imagination, both of those. So what happens is we're following the client's experience. So for example, I might say, somebody, well, would you want to work do a little bit with me, Jack, just with that initial? So yeah, just close your eyes for a minute. And so just let your attention drop down into your belly so that you're aware of your body. And as you just notice, you're also breathing, you settle in. What are you noticing? What's calling your attention first?
There's kind of a tension on the sides of my neck going down into the top of my shoulders. I just felt like it was a process that was unfolding. It was more like just floating down a river, just allowing the river to go where it went, if that makes any
Yes.
sense,
Yeah, that's exactly right. One of the things, and you probably noticed this in the process, we were giving emotion form. The imagination is giving emotion form. So it has an appearance, because the left brain gets really afraid of emotion. It's really intimidated because it's invisible. And because emotion feels invisible, it feels like consuming. So when we're angry, we can feel so afraid of being consumed by the anger, because it's like it's everywhere, because it's invisible. I can't tell, but it feels like this huge monster that's going to eat me alive or other people alive. And that's what scares us from allowing our emotional system to work the way it's supposed to. Something that it can measure, that it can analyze, that it can actually, figure out, then it becomes empowered to be a partner with the emotional, creative part of the brain that brought the image in the first place. So it really is different.
Now that's really interesting, because when I was a psychotherapist years and years ago, we'd constantly hear people say, if I start crying, I'll never stop. If I get angry, you're going to have to pull I'll explode. You're going to have to scrape me off the walls. And that sense of no boundary. And, I'd always say something smart ass, like I've never had anyone cry for 2 weeks, or I've never had to scrape anyone off the wall, just to but what you're saying about the idea of it having a visual boundary, which makes it containable and less scary, more
Mhm.
manageable. Like I saw that lava literally just going down the hall, eating up rooms where I had bad memories, you know,
Right.
um, and until all of a sudden the school dissolved, and there was a gym across the creek, which was part of the school, dissolved, and then it was all just like dead land, and then all of a sudden grass started to grow, and butterflies and flowers and kids playing, and it's fascinating. Well, I think I'm going to make a statement. I think I find, and wonder if you do too, that when people have what I would call emotional reactions that seem to be disproportionate to the current stimulus, that it's usually something that's triggering something that's been there in the past. And then like my volcano comes roaring out because
Right.
someone else tried, like my wife might have said, you can't go bowling with the guys or something, and then I go, and it's like,
Right.
yeah. And so when we're healing or releasing and re-imaging all this stuff, then we become less reactive in the present moment to things that, we shouldn't be exploding about or caving in.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, yeah. When it's an overreaction, it means now you're reacting to the current situation, but has a thread to bigger situations earlier that were more traumatic. And in fact, in RIM, what happens in the research now grounds this, that when PTSD is cumulative, so that when somebody has had trauma in their life, it leaves them more vulnerable to having PTSD in a situation where somebody else who didn't have trauma earlier doesn't. For instance, in the Boston bombing, I worked with somebody who was, physically affected with implosion injuries at the end when the bomb went off.
The marathon.
Yeah, marathon. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Marathon finish line. Um, and she actually was using uh, cognitive behavioral therapy and had 125 sessions, and she was still just as reactive. Her body, because it was her body, was reacting and would go into, the symptoms of flashback. And after one REM session, she started to be able to heal. Her body actually changed how well it was allowing the healing to happen. But in her session, what was really interesting, and this was my point, is in the beginning of the session, she actually went back to a trauma in childhood. And so we did the deeper work first. And then she came out and then she looked at her experience of herself at the bombing, and then it didn't look the same anymore. It didn't have the same impact emotionally anymore. And so it's we're just really amazing as beings. We're designed with so, I think that's what really changed for me with REM, is like, wow, we are really capable of so much. We just are misusing it right now. We're trying to override our natural ability to be emotionally healthy.